you're being too much. What they're really saying is you're exceeding their comfort level. My name is Dr. Janelle Abela. Welcome to Beyond the Playbook. I talk about human interaction and learning theory, and this week we're talking about emotional response. What I want to talk to you about is the person the problem, or is the capacity to hold hard conversation the problem? Something that I've been doing with a lot of my clients in the last couple weeks, and especially as we're in Black History Month and Women's History Month, has really leaned into the conversation of how do you have tough conversations? Why do people want to have tough conversations? And what can you do to help having those tough conversations? Because in Black History Month, we're supposed to be having hard conversations about what we're doing, how we're doing it, why people feel a certain way, what are the historical injustices that have led to this moment. With Women's History Month coming up in a couple of weeks, the same thing. We want to talk about the challenges and barriers that women experience in our workplaces, in our spaces, and understand those historical injustices that have led to us today. We need to have those tough conversations, but if we're not comfortable having tough conversations, it can cause an even bigger rift in our spaces. So let's talk about what these tough conversations look like, how they show up, who's having them, and why we need to have them to help our organizations grow. A few things I want to talk about today. I want to talk about our nervous system, why people have tough conversations, and I also want to talk about emotional suppression in the workplace. So first, we need to talk about where we're at, and that's emotional suppression. Emotional suppression is tied to professionalism standards. You are oversharing in the workplace, you're saying too much in the workplace, and there's been a lot of workplace conversation about what you bring into the workplace and what you leave at home. And that does tie to the work-life balance. It also ties to professionalism and what's expected. But then there's another piece there about vulnerability, which has been a big conversation in the workplace. We want people to share, bring their whole selves in, be authentic, be genuine, be a contributor based on your life experiences and who you are. But sometimes that creates discomfort, and that discomfort is a big signal for inappropriate behavior. This shouldn't be happening here. I shouldn't be uncomfortable in the workplace. But that discomfort comes from low relational capacity. If I don't have the lived experience or identity or ability to connect through emotional intelligence to those individuals, then how am I going to feel compassion and empathy and be able to understand why they're sharing what they're sharing and how to respond to that? I'm going to feel that discomfort and feel that's not a feeling I'm supposed to have in the workplace. That's not a feeling I'm supposed to have in a classroom. So I'm going to shut this down. I'm going to say no. And that's where the harm really comes in. But the reality is you can have boundaries and you can have inclusion. You can have boundaries and you can allow people to contribute in spaces. Those boundaries often are tied to a discomfort that comes from that lack of emotional relatability. We don't really know why people are saying what they're saying, how they're acting, and we don't understand it. So we are uncomfortable by it, and then we push it out the door, or we say, that's not what is expected here. So where does that nervous system kind of shift, and why does oversharing become a piece of our workplace? And the reality is, it's people who have experienced harm or discomfort or marginalization, they want to get safe fast. So when they're entering new spaces, they've lived through that instability in their life. They don't have the luxury of moving slow. They don't have that luxury of building trust over a long period of time, or trusting that the trust is there, that they are going to just have a safe space, because that's not what they've been taught in all of the spaces and all of the systems that they've engaged in over time. Now, let me tell you, during Black History Month, during Women's History Month, during any Pride Month or any recognition period, often the people who are doing the work are the people who experience the harm, because people who are aware and are educated about the harm, they often want to share and express and contribute to that movement forward. So they become advocates, they become allies, and they're still harmed in these situations. So if you're a person of color or you're a woman and you're advocating for awareness talks or you're advocating for education or policy changes, it's not just that you're working towards that change. You're also the one that's experiencing the harm tied to that change not happening. And it's an added layer of complexity in these relationships. This is something that I'm very familiar with, being someone who works in the equity and inclusion space, someone who has experienced systemic issues in the classroom, in the workplace, in society. I see what is happening to me. I want to help others who are like me not experience this. But I am advocating, I'm creating education, I'm creating resources, I am sharing and doing workshops and trainings and all of these things while I'm still experiencing it myself. And that is an extremely difficult challenge because I'm creating and working towards creating psychological safety with that unsafety for myself. So that's kind of where that oversharing comes in. It's not just a marginalized group issue. It's not just someone who's experiencing trauma or harm issue. It's also starting to shift generationally. Millennials and Gen Zs are becoming overly open in the workplace, in classrooms, and that's very different compared to older workplace norms. The traditional professionalism perspective compared to what is welcome now is very different. Policies have changed, workplace practices have changed, the type of conversation in the workplace has changed, and all of that is tied to people becoming more authentic and genuine, but it's also because vulnerability has become normalized through reality TV, through social media. People are able to express who they are, what they experience, why they experience it, how they feel, and they're demanding change because of their experiences. They want to share what they're experiencing. They want people to become aware of it and acknowledge it, validate it, and then they want action taken as a result of it. And that action is that discomfort piece, is where the discomfort comes in because it feels like it's too much, too quick, too fast, but really they're just sharing what has been happening all along. Let's be honest. Some workplaces still aren't psychologically safe. And I'd say actually a lot of workplaces aren't psychologically safe. 68% of people who work in Canada are noting that psychological safety doesn't exist. Numbers very similar for the United States, looking around 3/4 of people. And even though organizations love to say, bring your whole self to work, the test actually happens when people do. Many people quietly scan the safety of their workplace every single day. Psychological safety is determined by what happens when people speak up. So the conversation about bringing your whole self to work, sure, that's great. But what happens when they do? What's the repercussion? What's the outcome? What is going on when people do share? It's that discomfort. And that discomfort that other people feel pushes people right back down. Now, there's two kind of conversations we need to have here. What is performative psychological safety and what is operational safety? Because performative psychological safety is when it's in your values, it's in your messaging, it's in your leadership speeches. You could be having these policies. A lot of people are moving towards inclusive workplace policies where you're encouraged to bring yourself, your authentic self, into the workplace. But there's inconsistent lived experiences of people in the workplace. They're coming in and they're saying, oh, I'm bringing my whole self to work and everything is fine. There's nothing wrong. Other people are bringing their whole selves to work and they're experiencing harm. They're experiencing people saying you're being too much. And that's where the problems exist. It's inconsistent response to these psychological safety movements. We encourage open dialogue, a huge push to have open communication. My door is always open. Bring your whole self. You're included here. We include everyone. We value everyone. But it's not about the branding. Employees are watching behavior, and you can brand all you want to inclusion, to representation for various recognition months or whatever it may be. If the feeling is not reflective of the brand, then you're not having an effective outcome. And that is tied to the lack of communication skills, the lack of accountability, and the lack of transparency in the workplace, because people say we're going to do something, but then that's not what happens. 1 in 4 people feel that they cannot speak up at work. I'd say that number is much higher. Having conversations with employees in various industries, women in law enforcement, women in skilled trades. I see marginalized people of color in various industries, just general marginalized groups in all sorts of industries who may be a minority in their workspace. Know that there's something harmful happening to them and they don't share, or they recognize that they cannot share because they won't be validated or valued. So they're going to say, so-and-so is happening to me. But then the response isn't going to be empathy and compassion. It's going to be, you're misunderstanding the situation. Maybe that wasn't their intention. That probably isn't what's really happening. And so they don't bring it up at all. Operational psychological safety is built into leadership behavior. This is what that shift needs to be. It's the reinforced consistent responses. So making sure that the response to creating psychologically safe environments is consistent in every environment. People are protected by the process surrounding psychological safety. It's visible how mistakes are handled, how inconsistencies are handled, that transparency. That builds accountability for people who are experiencing harm, because they experienced harm, but they're seeing that harm is being addressed. So they may speak up the next time. They may come out and say, yes, this is my issue. When we experience things differently across the same identity group, it's hard to have psychological safety. So it shows up when people raise concerns and they're not sidelined or they're not pushed back. It's when mistakes are treated as learning and they're not treated as character flaws. So we're not looking at the individual's problem. We're looking at the behavior or the learning gap. It happens when there's equity deserving staff or people who are marginalized who then now experience the same safety as dominant groups. Because when we don't have that safety consistent across every individual, then we're not going to have the perspective of safety from people in the workplace. That comes from return to office tensions that are happening in every workplace across Canada and the United States right now. Increased employee voice on social media is a huge risk because now people are pushing that narrative outward. And that's for validation. They're posting because they want to be seen, heard, and valued. They're looking for psychological safety. The same reason that people speak up in the workplace is they want someone to value them, to validate them, to say, I get you. I understand what you're going through. We can work to make this space better for you. When they're not going to get it in the workplace, they're going to go elsewhere. And then we start to see whistleblower culture becoming more visible because people aren't putting up with it anymore, because they shouldn't have to, because we suppressed it through professionalism before. And now we're moving into an era where people feel comfortable coming out and saying, this is what's happening. I deserve better. And they do. It's not about individuals anymore. It's about systems. We're talking about how a system creates harm for a specific demographic or for specific people in the workplace. Now, the question that you may be thinking about is, why does high transparency make people uncomfortable? Because it's not something that they're familiar with. People who are trained to be managers, supervisors, leaders, however you classify them, they're trained on performance management. They're not trained for emotional complexity, period. Having tough conversations is incredibly challenging for people who don't have emotional intelligence, for people who are not trained to be empathetic, and for people who don't have the skill in having complex conversations because they're not educated in equity issues, they're not educated in trauma or trauma-informed approaches. And so when it shows up in the workplace, it's very direct, it's very real, and it feels like, oh my gosh, what do you mean all of this is happening under my watch? What do you mean all of this is happening in my workplace? There's a lot of risk that develops. They become very defensive. They become hostile. They become concerned. They don't know how to respond. They don't have the skills to respond. And all of a sudden, Their training on compliance is now supposed to apply to emotional complexity. And the easiest way to respond is, that's not welcome in the workplace. That's not what you should be bringing into the workplace. You're too much for this space. There's another piece here where people really do truly fear saying anything in today's political climate because they don't want to be put on social media. They don't want to be called out. They don't really know what to say because they don't know what side of a conversation to be on. We don't have tough conversations. We don't know how to disagree with people. We don't know how to say, you are valid. You are acknowledged. I recognize that you feel harm, and you can still not agree with them. You don't have to agree with what someone's saying to show them psychological safety. That is the biggest controversy in complex conversations. You don't have to agree with someone. You have to show that you care and have the skill to have that tough conversation. One thing I always tell leaders is that avoidance in the workplace is usually pretty well dressed. It shows up in professionalism, busyness. Hey, let's circle back. Number one statement that people say when they don't know how to handle something. But really, it's that discomfort and that lack of skill to address what's challenging. Let's circle back. Sure, you can circle back. But the question is, are you going to circle back? Because I do recommend that if you're not prepared to have a conversation in the moment, you can value and validate someone and say, let me go figure out what I want to say and how I want to say it and come back to you. But you actually have to circle back. And that's something that doesn't often happen, which creates that psychologically unsafe environment. It's so much easier right now than any time in history to hide from these conversations. Remote work, hybrid work. Oh, I'm not in the office at the same time as that person, or it's not personal when we're online, or I don't want to send them an email. The political climate and social media aspect is so challenging because people fear missteps in the workplace, and psychological safety is happening so much faster. We're having conversations about this so much faster than the skills building. Workplaces have not yet invested in creating psychological safety skills, trauma-informed workplace skills. There's not a lot of high accountability. There's not transparency, and we haven't made that shift. The issues are rising. They're becoming more apparent. People are calling things out. Things are becoming really front of mind. And the skills of leaders have stayed the same. So these people are still managing these now emotionally complex problems without the skill. Invest in developing the skill. How do you talk to people? How do you understand where they're coming from? What is your situational leadership approach? Do you understand the difference between skills and knowledge and confidence and motivation? Do you understand why people act the way they do when they're coming into the workplace? That emotional intelligence piece. Can you be aware of their experiences? Do you have a trauma-informed understanding of why they could be acting the way they are, reacting the way they are, or feeling the way they are? Because if you don't, those are skills that need to be built critically, urgently, right now. Now, the complexity of this is that trauma-informed doesn't mean anything goes. We need to understand why behavior is happening. That doesn't mean we're dropping standards. So it's not going to say, oh, they have trauma, just let them overreact, or they went through this, so that's why they're acting this way, or they, have a lot going on in their life, so they're allowed to behave this way. No. And that's an excuse that's happened a lot. And I've experienced this in my own life, where people have reacted a certain way and extremely unprofessional way. They've made claims and statements that are so harmful. And when I've called it out, the response is, they've got a lot going on in their life you don't even understand. You don't get it. You don't know what they're going through. Okay. So where's the line? At what point am I going through enough that I can do whatever I want to everyone else? Is it not having coffee in the morning? Is it stubbing my toe? Is it not having gas in my car? Is it someone hitting my car with their door? Is it tripping on my stairs? What is it? My outfit not fitting right? Is it having a family member die? Is it that there's a huge social injustice movement that's harming my demographic? Is it the political climate suppressing my rights? Where's the line? Because when we start to say that someone's allowed to do something because of the experiences that they're having, that's when trauma-informed is not being applied. Because trauma-informed means, yes, you're aware, but it does not reduce the boundaries or the standards that are set for people in our spaces. And that's something that often gets confused. It creates a lot of harm for people because we can understand behavior and not excuse harm. Those aren't tied together. People can be going through something and still be respectful to their colleagues and still get work done in a certain way and capacity. When leaders are over accommodating, then they start to create a space for that harm to then exist for others. And then it goes back the other way. Strong leaders can't swing between shut it down and anything goes. It's a skill that allows people to validate human experience, but also being very careful about the expectations and boundaries that you're setting for those people. Otherwise, you fear that narrative of a workplace becoming too soft and you start to develop misunderstandings about psychological safety. And then we start to lose balance between performance, accountability, and humanity. When you start to lose that balance, then it's, I can't care about someone because the workplace is going to go up in flames. I can't care about someone because they're going to be harmful to other people. Or who do I care more about? Or what situation is more concerning for us today? You can care about people and still hold a standard and still have accommodations for those people within reason. Sometimes we call too much when we call things too much, it's not really too much. It's someone responding to an unsafe environment or a series or a lifetime of unsafe environments. And for people who feel like something is too much, it's because they've had that luxury of feeling safe. The question isn't how do we quiet people who are being too much? It's about how we build spaces where they don't have to fight so hard to be heard. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Playbook. My name is Dr. Janelle Abela. I'm so excited to have these conversations with you because it's really a great opportunity to start thinking about where we start. What are we doing? How are we supporting people? And in these few months, as we start to really pack in additional awareness events and recognition events and awards and all these things, start to consider what the little things you can do are as well, because the people who are advocates and allies are also experiencing challenging life experiences for themselves. They could be the people who are experiencing harm. I also want you to think about what you're doing to build those critical skills, how you are having tough conversations. Do you have language skills to disagree with people? Do you have the ability to have a conversation and say, I'm going to validate you, but I don't agree with you. I understand where you're coming from, but that's not what I think. Because disagreement is something that is so critically important in our workplaces, in our classrooms, in our society. And we're moving so far away from it right now because we're scared of the people we disagree with. We have tons of great resources online, saveoursolutions.ca. We have other podcasts. We have companion blogs. We have Signals and Patterns, which is our monthly brief. We also have our first quarterly report out, which is learning seasons for Q1 2026, looking at the issues we're facing and insights for 2026 and beyond. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so incredibly grateful that you're taking the time to learn and go get a little more comfortable with being uncomfortable.